I've played a lot of games on a wide berth of systems, and throughout the years, I've surrounded myself in tons of different franchises to try to explore how these franchises evolve throughout time. But sometimes these games don't get the sequel they deserve, and it's a shame. This is a Firefighter monthly video giveaway, and the lucky winner, Moo, decided to ask me to make a video about 10 games that never got a sequel that deserve it, in my opinion, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Let's begin. Hagane is an interesting game because it's a combination of all the coolest aspects of the games of the era mixed together to formulate an incredibly difficult game that actually gives you a sense of accomplishment when you beat it. We play as a ninja cyborg named Hagane, and our whole objective is to take on an enemy faction. It's a cyberpunk samurai ninja game with sprinklings of Shinobi, Mega Man X, and Super Ghouls and Ghosts enemy placement. It's a blast. One of the things that I loved about it is just how flexible Hagane is as a character. He can do everything. He can do flying kicks, launch projectiles, attack people with a sword, he can do wall kicks, there's badass rocket somersaults that can one-shot bosses if you time it right, and it even has Mode 7 stages, so it's like the best representation of what the Super Nintendo had to offer. It's a shame too. This game is an underrated gem on the Super Nintendo. Adventure games in the 90s, they tended to either have a family of games they belonged to, or they were standalones. And the thing that sucks is that the standalones were oftentimes way more fun than the ones that belonged to a franchise. Loom was published by Lucasfilms and directed by Brian Moriarty. Brian Moriarty did a few Infocom games that you might know, Beyond Zork and Wishbringer. But more importantly, he made Loom, which is hands down one of my favorite games. Good, solid music with my mental health makes me feel vulnerable. I believe kids nowadays call it in the feels. Cringe, isn't it? Well, yeah, Loom brings me to a fantasy world where I control Bob and Threadbare, and we go on a quest of self-exploration and self-purpose, uniting the various guilds, or at least attempting to prevent the Third Shadow from covering the world in darkness. The whole game revolves around a music system that casts spells one way and dispels objects if you play it in reverse. It's also criminally short. I really wish that there had been just one more game in this franchise. The mechanics were beyond awesome. Torrins Passage is my guilty pleasure game and is one of the first memories I have of PC gaming, and I hold it in tremendously high regard, and to this day, every time I talk to Al Lowe, I try to peer pressure him into funding a sequel, because the story and the puzzles of Torrins Passage, they're tremendously fun. We play as Torrin, whose adoptive parents are kidnapped by a sorceress named Licentia, who is framed for the murder of Torrin's parents, the king and queen of the lands above. We travel through all of these nested subworlds, working our way to the lands below to save our family. This game was supposed to be a 5-game series, but we only got one. Tragically, this game existed during a time where Sierra was being torn to pieces, and the franchise didn't really stand a chance. In fact, many Sierra franchises didn't. This was the first tactical RPG I ever played, way back when the ZSNES emulator came out. Remember that? Maybe I'm the young one because I didn't mess with it until the mid-2000s, and this sucker's been out since 1997. Bahamut Lagoon was created by Square, and it is really unique. We control a group of dragons who we can use as units and try to give them commands. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't, and they do have their own individual battle style. We can also evolve them by feeding them weapons, armor, or items that we acquire from battle, or are no longer using. It's awesome. It does maintain a generic plot. Area A is mad at Area B, so they invade B, but A fights back. That's the game. But the game's element of loyalty, food preferences for dragons, the artwork, and literally everything else more than distract you from this mild oversight in design. The thing that sucks is that this was only released in Japan, and I can't figure out for the life of me why that was. Maybe they thought the rest of the world wouldn't like it. I don't know, it's not like Square was unknown in 1996. Fun fact, the working title for this game was Final Fantasy Tactics. That's something you know now. The 3DO has a, let's just say, reputation. for having absolute shovelware from lesser-known developers. And it's true, it's not an unworthy reputation. There are tons of bad games on the 3DO in comparison to the usual ratio we see from powerhouse franchises. The 3DO was an oddball, not as bad as the CDI, but the quality of the games were more often than not lackluster. But then I found a hidden gem, a mercenary. This game is awesome. The plot takes place in 2004, and a guy named Dr. Rand is working on astral projection, think Doctor Strange shit, and he discovers this lady named Raven who warns him of a future where everyone is involved in this VR network called Perfect. Perfect traps its users in this future scenario, and Dr. Rand made it his life's work to study how Perfect worked and how to shut it down. That's where we come into play. 18 months after Rand gets a psionic feedback that puts him in a mental institute, our unnamed protagonist joins up with a surviving team that Dr. Rand had put together. Basically, our job is to go into this VR world and take out anyone and everyone playing this virtual MMORPG for the sole purpose of destroying Perfect 1, the main server. If we do that, we can release everyone who is trapped by it. It was a very unique, novel concept, and while I'm sure that there would never be a proper storyline to succeed this, it's still nice to imagine that maybe in some parallel universe, this gem on the 3DO would get a sequel from a company that cared. This game blew me out of the water. I always knew that Eternal Darkness was a cult classic on the GameCube, and we can thank Silicon Knights for doing an epic job in creating a very efficient, fourth wall breaking, in-your-face horror game with decent replayability. The fact that this even existed was because Nintendo was interested in Silicon Knights after they released Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, and from there, reached out to Silicon Knights to create a world chock full of Lovecraftian aspects. We play as Alexandra Rovius, who goes back to her grandfather's estate after he was found brutally murdered. She finds a book called The Tome of Eternal Darkness, and from that point on, we experience these memories of various people that interacted with the tome, such as Pius, Patient Zero of the tome's incredible power. Now, the game is repetitive, but the sanity effects that happen, they always tend to catch you off guard, even when you've seen them, and you know what to expect. It causes a truly unique experience that keeps you on your toes. I honestly wish there had been a sequel. In fact, the director Dennis Dyack has tried for years to make a sequel with his new company, but it's never come to fruition. Rockstar is notorious for their standalone titles. It's not very often that we see franchises outside of Grand Theft Auto. That's just the way that they've been for a very long time. In fact, they only currently maintain 4 major franchises: Grand Theft Auto, Max Payne, Midnight Club, and Red Dead. The rest were spin-offs outside of Manhunt, which obviously had 2 games. And it's a shame because they could be working on these. They just choose not to. They have this undying resolve-based boner for GTA 5 and GTA Online, and I don't know if we'll ever see another major franchise release for anything but Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead, and in my opinion, Red Dead deserves it. But Grand Theft Auto, it's been so long since a game came out that I could honestly care less when Grand Theft Auto 6 releases. Bully, however, was an incredibly fun and unique game. We play as Jimmy Hopkins, who gets dumped off at a boarding school by his inefficient mother, and Jimmy works his way through all of these cliques, taking control of them, all the while trying to stay out of the headmaster's office or out of trouble in general. We fight members of the jocks, the greasers, the nerds, the preppies. It's a good time. It's irritating that Rockstar has teased a sequel throughout the years, but they never come clean about it. They always leak information, and that information is pretty unreliable. I would still love to see a Bully 2. I think it would be great. In my opinion, Diddy Kong Racing is one of the best racing games of the retro gaming era, in its own way, if we look at all the competitors. Now, I'm not suggesting it's better than Gran Turismo or Need for Speed, but as a racing game, it was lovable, fun, difficult, yes, even sometimes unfair, but grossly fun, and it's a shame that we never got a proper sequel for it. And before anyone pops up in the comments section saying Banjo Pilot on the Game Boy Advance was the sequel, no, fuck that game. Banjo Pilot only exists because Nintendo's share of Rare at the time was sold to Microsoft, who historically has shit on the entire legacy of Rare. If you like Microsoft-era Rare, Bully for you. I don't. The game was supposed to have a sequel. It demanded a sequel, and it was going to be on the GameCube, Donkey Kong Racing. And we can thank Nintendo for screwing the pooch on that. Their refusal to buy the other shares of Rare resulted in Microsoft swooping in and doing what they've done to the brand. Even Timber the Tiger was supposed to have his own game, and it was reconfigured to be Star Fox Adventures. I really wish we had a solid follow-up to this. I really do. But the chances are, with Nintendo loving Mario Kart as much as they do, we will never see one. So this was my first proper survival game. I'm not much for games where I need to hoard a lot of assets and learn all these recipes to survive while also keeping track of my health and thirst. That's something I already contend with as a conscious human, so I don't particularly want to do it in a fucking video game. But I buckled down and I played Raft with one of my good friends, Caleb. Played it for months straight, and then the final chapter dropped, so we started over. That's how good it was. And it was even more fun with friends. In Raft, the world is flooded and we accept the role as a lone forward scout who builds things based solely on the debris that we find and the materials we discover while anchoring our boat, salvaging islands. You might think this game is a chore, and yeah, in some ways it is, but it's immensely fun and therapeutic in some ways. Usually when people do the same thing over and over and over again, it gets boring, but that's never the case with Raft. The pacing is perfect. It kind of seemed like a one and done, and that's a shame, because it's a solid game. LA Noire is a game that some people like, some people don't. Personally, I enjoyed it. I found the role reversal of being someone good in a world of evil set in the 1940s as a fun departure from what we came to expect with Rockstar. I mean, to date, the only other games I played where I was a police officer was the Police Quest series, True Crime, and a really dumb game called World's Scariest Police Chases. I swear, that game exists, and yes, I did enjoy it as a kid. But LA Noire was different for obvious reasons. It used a very specific technology on the PS3 that a lot of people didn't like. Some people called it Uncanny Valley. But I thought the whole lie detection system based on facial cues was pretty genius. And the story is straight out of film noir. The whole aesthetic is great. Now obviously it makes zero sense for LA Noire 2 for reasons I won't discuss because I don't want to spoil anything. But could you imagine a New York noir, or Chicago noir, or even Miami noir? All these cities that served as landscapes for police dramas would be excellent, but again, Rockstar tends to shy away from anything that isn't Grand Theft Auto, and Rockstar even liquidated Team Bondi. Fun fact, Team Bondi was working on a spiritual successor to this. It was called Whore of the Orient. I know it's a strong name, but I would have been curious to play it. And those are 10 games that I wish had a sequel. Are there any games that you've played in your life that you feel deserve the illustrious sequel treatment? Feel free to comment down below. Who knows, maybe you'll expose somebody to a wonderful memory. We're getting incredibly close to that 4,000 subscriber goal. This wild ride has given my neurodivergent life purpose. And the fact that there are people out there who like what I do, that's a magical feeling. If you want to join our community, it would help tremendously. I'd love to have you here. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortefyre out.